Founders Square. We're here because it's Mississippi's once-a-year giant, I'm going to call it gigantic house party. And, of course, the pavilion, which has been the site where so many political candidates through the years have addressed Mississippians as they deliver their campaign message and their platforms. And certainly in an election year, we're pleased to welcome the Speaker of the House of the great state of Mississippi, Speaker Philip Gunn. Good to see you, sir.
Hey, Gerard, thank you so much for having me. Great to be here today. Glad you got a nice tent for us to sit under.
I got a tent
and a fan going.
And some fans and trees. That's because I have to sit in this chair for 3 hours.
Yes, and it's a hard chair, too. And it's not the normal cushy one you get to sit in back in the studio.
That's exactly right. In the air-conditioned studio, usually Rhino freezes me out.
Yes, sir. That's a good place to be.
It is so cold.
You're right.
All right, so you delivered remarks today?
I tried to, yes, sir.
And tell us what you talked about.
Well, I just talked about our culture and the things, fighting for the things that are important. Many people may or may not realize that there was a tremendous theologian in American history named J. Machen Gresham who wrote a book 100 years ago. And in that book, it was called Christianity and Liberalism, and it was his defense of the Christian faith. And in that book, he said the really important things are the things about which men fight. And that comment is being celebrated because it is the 100-year anniversary of that book. Well, it got me to thinking about the important things are the things about which we fight. And so I recounted some of the accomplishments that Republicans have given to Mississippi over the last 12 years since they gained control in the House of Representatives, and just talked about some of the things that we as conservatives have pushed forward. We're in great financial shape because of conservative financial decisions. Education improvements have been legendary in this state over the last 12 years, historic actually. We overturned Roe versus Wade. We did the largest tax cut in history. We did the largest teacher pay raise in history. And I just took my time to recount those things and then contrasted that to what's going on in Washington and how it seems to be such dysfunction up there. And talked about a few of the things that we don't see happening. If we're electing leaders who are going to fight for the things that are important, our leaders in Washington seem to be failing on so many fronts. And we counted, the border and the spending and the woke agenda that's being pushed down our throats, and the socialism and the communism and the things like that are taking place up there. And we've got to have leaders who are going to fight for the things that are really important. And all those things work to undo our culture, undo our society, and in the end, take away our freedoms and undo our country. So those are some of the themes that I tried to hit in the 10 minutes that I had.
An observation I've made, Mr. Speaker, is that it seems like the states are really bifurcating and almost dividing across a number of these issues you talk about.
They are.
And I mean, it's not even – there's no overlap on many of these issues. You look at abortion, for example, is one of those issues. You look at something that we prohibited here via law and your leadership, the gender affirmation surgery on minors, where we prohibited that here. You see other states actually increasing access to that and actually paying for it in some cases.
And telling parents that they have no right to
even
decide that decision make a decision for
go to jail if you don't support it, which is crazy. So, I mean, I used to think, Mr. Speaker, that, that there was kind of small nuanced differences in laws in the state. Like I brought up the example in Florida, you don't have to wear a helmet to ride a motorcycle.
Yes.
And you do here. Okay, that's not that big a deal, really. But when you start looking at some of these issues, these are huge moving issues, if you will.
That is correct, and it's based upon the shifts in the culture. And I talked about that a little bit this morning when you and I had breakfast.
Yeah.
These are cultural changes, and sadly, as you pointed out, the blue states are getting bluer, red states are getting redder. There's a divide that seems to be occurring, and people are not looking for common ground, things that they can work toward. They're demonizing people who don't agree with them.
Yeah.
And that just creates dysfunction.
You made a great point, and we've said it many times on the show, that a lot of these ideas and I guess support for that crazy ideology, the ground zero for it, unfortunately, is America's universities.
Yes, sir. Yeah, the universities seem to be a breeding ground for liberal ideology.
And I think it's the professors bring that, indoctrinate the students, brainwash them where they're at a very impressionable age.
That is certainly happening in a lot of places. I was fortunate to speak at one of our universities here back in the fall, and was a little bit apprehensive about it because I didn't know how it would be received. And it was a class. I spoke to his leadership class, about 125 kids in the class. And I was pleasantly surprised at how many of them were conservative. The students were conservative. Yeah. They believed conservative spending policies, conservative values, and it was refreshing to see that some of those students had not been influenced by that. But sometimes the professors tend to push that ideology and punish them, and that's why we have groups like the Alliance Defending Freedom that was at a breakfast this morning who defend those students who are persecuted and fined and punished for their conservative views. And
you talked a little bit about some things that you'd like to see the incoming members of our legislature and leadership focus on. You, of course, are retiring from the State House of Representatives. Right. Go through that a little bit.
Yes, we talked this morning a little bit about one was the Save Title IX Act. This is Title IX of federal government was an act designed to bring equality in women's sports, and many people are familiar with that. Yep. On the college level and maybe even on the high school level, we are to give women the same athletic opportunities as men. Unfortunately, the Biden administration has defined sex not to be biological sex, but they've tried to include the people who define themselves as transgender or sexual orientation.
However they identify.
And the result of that has been that we got men competing against women in high school sports and college sports. They're going into women's bathrooms. They're declaring themselves a woman and going into women's locker rooms. And that is just inappropriate. We cannot have that. And so the Save Title IX Act was one of those pieces of legislation that I would like to see next legislature pass, so we can protect our women from that kind of
why haven't we been able to get that done? What's the holdup there, do you think?
Well, it just came on the scene last year.
Yeah.
And as you know, many times items of first impression, there's a lot of unknowns. We need to think about this.
Sure.
And for whatever reason, we had a lot of issues. And I will as a side note to that, to say that the Republican women of Mississippi had 15 agenda items they had last year. This was one of them, and they passed 11 of them. So it wasn't like they didn't have success.
You'd have to call that a success.
But this is one of those items that I think needs to be passed. We need to protect our women and children from that type of harassment, if you want to call it that, where these people are coming in an inappropriate setting. So that was one of the things that I mentioned. There was another one, the Parents' Bill of Rights.
Yeah, talked about that.
Which we talked about the fact that I believe parents have the right to educate their children according to what they think is best for their child. And if that is private schooling or homeschooling or public schooling or whatever options are out there, parents have the right to make those decisions, not the federal government. Yeah. And so one of the bills that I'd like to see passed next year is what we call the Parents' Bill of Rights, which basically says that parents have the right to educate their children in the manner they see fit, and we as a government should be there to support that, to supplement that, not to work against that, which I think is what we're seeing in so many places. Statistically, in Mississippi, 9 out of 10 kids go to the public schools.
Right.
That shows the tremendous influence that the public schools have on the minds of the next generation.
Yeah.
And if they are pushing forward ideologies that are left-wing ideologies or liberal ideologies, then that's affecting the children. And the parents, many of whom can't afford to pay for private school or homeschool, they don't have those options.
Yeah.
But yet they don't want their children subjected to that. They ought to have the freedom to make sure their child is educated in a manner that they see fit. So that's one of the things the Parental Bill of Rights does. I'd like to see that passed next year.
I also think that would boost the quality, bolster the quality of the public schools if they feel like they don't have a captive audience that they do now. So.
Exactly. And then it would bring a little competition to the table, which makes them fly right.
Works pretty good in the private sector.
Right. Works very good. and you think about that, we allow free market competition in everything except our schools and hospitals.
Yeah.
We got
That's
that
true.
CON law, which I'm not a fan
I know
of.
you and I have talked about that a lot.
And we don't apply that logic to any other sector that I can think of
Right.
as I sit here, except those two things.
Before we go here, what are you thinking about next for you?
Well, I'm thinking through that right now, praying about different options. I am trying to consider where the Lord would have me serve next. And that may be an elected office. It may be doing something else. I'm just trying to think through that right now and see what opens up.
Yes, sir. Mr.
Hopefully
Speaker.
I'll be able to come back on your show from
Yes,
time
sir.
to time.
You're welcome anytime. Mr. Speaker, Philip Gunn, appreciate your service and your leadership, sir.
Absolutely.
In the House of Representatives and as one of the top 3 leaders in the state of Mississippi, and good luck to you in your future endeavors.
Well, you're mighty kind, Gerard. Appreciate your friendship. Appreciate SuperTalk. They've always been kind to let me come on the show, and I hope that'll continue.
Yes, sir. We've got Dr. John Witcher, candidate for governor, coming up next. We've enjoyed the conversation with Speaker of the House, Philip Gunn.